Our next guest that we're going to welcome is John Odenkirk. He's the district biologist with the Virginia Department of Wildlife. And what's the R stand for?
Resources.
Well, there you go. I learned something new today.
Renamed recently.
And he's going to give us a lake fish report.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Chris, can you hear me okay?
We sure can, John. You're loud and clear, coming to us from some amazing fishing and venue, I'm sure.
Tidal Potomac River is beautiful, full of bass.
Nice.
So yeah, that's a hard presentation to follow. That was a great VDOT presentation, very professional, very articulate and encompassing. I will not nearly be as long, and I don't suspect there are as many people interested in fish as the roads around Lake Anna, but if there are, and anybody wants to follow up on anything I mention or don't mention, I'll be happy to deal with that, with an email or a phone call independently. But what I do want to the point I want to try to get across is I've been involved in a team that's managed the fisheries resources on Lake Anna pretty much my entire career with what used to be the Commission of Game and Inland Fisheries, then it was the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, and now the Department of Wildlife Resources. More than 30 years I've been involved with managing fish on Lake Anna. And right now, today, at this moment in time, the fishery on Lake Anna is way better than I've ever seen it, which is it's not nothing I did. It's just phenomenal, and I'm glad to be along for the ride that Lake Anna has given me. And part of that is habitat related. We've got more emergent vegetation, especially in the mid-lake region, than we've ever had, and that's primarily in the form of water willow. We've got a resurgence in both native and non-native submerged aquatic plants. It's not to the point yet where most people are unhappy with it, and that is helping to fuel this amazing production sequence, both primarily for largemouth bass, but also for other species. And our bass, we have sort of standardized sampling techniques. Most lakes in the state and my work area don't get surveyed every year. Lake Anna is an exception to that because of its importance, its elevation in terms of the economic value that fishery has, the commercial aspect in terms of the guides that make a living on it, and the recreation, the boost to the economy that recreational fishing brings to that area. We see that as an important enough resource. We survey Lake Anna annually. So most lakes don't, almost no other lake has this luxury. In the form of what we do is we do electrofishing in the spring, primarily for largemouth bass for almost the better part of a week. And then we do netting in the winter, which is for all species, sort of a community sample. And that evaluates what we call our pelagic stockings, which are hybrids, striped bass, and walleye or saugeye when we can get those, and the forage, the fish that the pelagic predators eat. So what we do is we take those data, we compile a summary. If anybody wants a summary, an annual summary, I'd be happy to share that. And then about every 4 or 5 years, we do a more comprehensive management report, which is also available off our website. What I can say is that the largemouth bass fishery in Lake Anna today is the best it's ever been. We're breaking records all the time with the number of fish we're catching and the size of fish we're catching, which is phenomenal. We also are adding in a new component to the largemouth bass fishery in the form of a small experimental F1 stocking. And an F1 is an original hybrid cross between a pure Florida and a pure northern largemouth bass. The idea behind this is bass anglers like to catch big fish. Well, most anglers like to catch big fish. Lake Anna has always been known as a good bass lake, but it's not always been known as like a real trophy bass lake. And we'd like to try to change that. And we like people, instead of having an 8 or 9 pound fish raise eyebrows, we want to hopefully have maybe an 11 or 12 pound fish raise eyebrows. And the idea is it was a small amount of fish. When I say a small amount, last year was the first time we ever stocked, and we put in about 12,000 of these F1 fingerlings. There's only a couple reservoirs in the state where we're doing this. It's a variable stocking rate. This year, Atlanta will receive about 3 times that number. And the idea is, like, maybe 7 to 10 years down the road, those original fish, survival will be fairly low, but they will contribute to the overall population and add a trophy potential. So that's our hope there. That's all I'm going to say about largemouth bass. The only other fish I'll mention are striped bass and the hybrid striped bass, which are maintained entirely through our stocking programs. And we finally, after many years of sort of toying with the stocking rates, settled on what I think, because all lakes are different. The productivities are different. The habitat's different. And Lake Anna has very marginal striped bass habitat, very, very marginal. Smith Mountain Lake, for example, has great reservoir striped bass habitat. And when I say habitat, I'm talking about oxygen and temperature. You need cool water with oxygen. If you don't have one without the other, you're pretty much wasting your time with adult stripers. So that's one of the reasons we've gone to the hybrid striped bass as well, since they're not as needy when it comes to habitat criteria. And so we've settled on 10 striped bass per acre annually and 10 hybrid striped bass per acre annually. So you're getting 20 of those fish, those Moronies, the genus of the fish, 20 Moronies an acre. So we're talking about a couple 100,000 fish, which is not a small amount of fish. And that is what we're doing at Lake Anna. And I'm so happy to say that the fishery is doing so well. And if anybody has any questions, I'll try to handle them now. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next topic.
So I actually have a question. I don't see any that have popped up for you on our chat feature, but I keep hearing about these invasive snakehead fish that are in the lake, and I don't really know what a snakehead is, what makes it invasive, and if it's something we should be concerned about when we're out swimming.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. And I probably should have had that as one of my set pieces going into this, because it almost, for me, I've been dealing with snakeheads now for almost 20 years, and it's sort of tired a little bit, especially since I've been surrounded by so much of the hysteria for so long. I've been quite involved on the front lines doing research and investigations of northern snakehead impacts. We've published a number of works. We've held a lot of meetings and symposia. And the bottom line is, when snakeheads are moving, they're being moved across the state and America by people because people like them. And we've increased the penalties in Virginia for people illegally moving snakeheads to a class 1 misdemeanor, which it wasn't back when we made some arrests earlier. And it's the same category as blue catfish. The bottom line is, we don't want people moving any fish in the Commonwealth. And especially, we don't want people moving fish that some people think could be invasive. Now, and when you say invasive, it's sort of a subjective term. There is a Wikipedia or Webster definition of that. And the connotation is that there's some ecological or economic damage. Honestly, we haven't seen that yet with snakeheads. Not to say it can't happen. I mean, what you could almost argue the opposite. It's created almost a new fishery, a cult fishery that's gotten so popular that the snakeheads are becoming very, very rare, where they once were very abundant. But what happens is the snakeheads expand their range, and they will expand their range. They'll be in every drainage in Virginia, at some point, and probably in every the lower 48 at some point. So what happens is it creates additional new hysteria as they occupy or expand their range. So it's like the wheel just keeps turning. It happens all over again. It's like we haven't learned anything, and so it causes a lot of fear and consternation. And so the media kind of grips on to it's evil. It's destroying. You've probably heard that narrative. We don't want people moving the fish. We don't. We're not trying to say they're bad, and we're not trying to say they're good. But right now, the jury's still out. So we just don't want people moving around, but they're being moved anyway, despite the penalties. And the bottom line is, they showed up in Anna about 4 or 5 years ago, and their numbers are still increasing, and they'll continue to increase for the next probably 5 to 10 years, and then they're going to hit a plateau, and then they're going to start declining. That's what they've done in the rivers where they've been the longest. That's what they've already started to do in some of the lakes where people stock them, the small lakes, like Lake Brittle and Burke. I manage 25 lakes in my district, so I have a 12-county district, and snakeheads have been stocked by our constituents in almost every lake. And so essentially what they've done is create these outdoor laboratories for us, because we've got so much data on these lakes for such a long time series. And then you just add snakeheads, and we have a set up for a before and after treatment effect with the addition of snakeheads. And we've already published some of that work on Lake Brittle and Lake Burke with just trying to suggest that they're not doing a whole lot. They occupy the same trophic level as largemouth, but they're not really competing with largemouth because there's adequate forage. And there's a lot of competition when there's a limitation on the resource. And so you have dietary overlap, which is not necessarily the same thing as competition. So, they cause a lot of, but the good thing is they're really good to eat too. They fight pretty well, and they're really good to eat. So we just encourage people, if you catch one, kill it, take it home and eat it. It's wonderful. There's a million different ways to cook it. There's not one of them that's the wrong way to cook it. So just make sure you cook it. No sushi, bring it home and eat it. And so that's, if people want more information on Snakeheads, I'd be happy to talk.
Well, we appreciate your information, and our folks are asking that you give us your contact information, and we can type it into the chat so people can see that as well.
Sure. So yeah, so my name is John Odenkirk, and just put a period between my first and last name. So it's JOHN dot ODENKIRK, John dot Odenkirk at DWR.Virginia.gov.
Perfect. We do have one other question. It says, is the same stocking rate being completed on the private side as the public side?
Okay, that's another great question. Well, the game department does no management on, AKA the waste heat treatment facility, the private side. Dominion does their normal sampling over there for their annual reports. It's quarterly surveys of electrofishing and netting that goes into their 316B, I believe it is, permitting paperwork. But because it's not public, we don't stock or manage it otherwise. We wouldn't. I mean, all the fish populations in Lake Anna are self-sustaining, except for the pelagic predators we stock, which we probably wouldn't be stocking anyway on the hot side because it's warmer, and both the striper and the walleye and their hybrids are more of a cool water species. That's one of the reasons the stripers don't do so well in Lake Anna proper. So it wouldn't make any sense intuitively to put them in a hotter environment where they would, not do well at all. And in fact, a lot of them could somehow negotiate the gravity feed underneath Dike 3, and they get from the main lake into the hot side anyway, especially during the winter. And they tend to show up at the plant a lot of times. So, so the fish get over there, but we're not actively managing the 3,400 acres over there.
Awesome. John, you have given us really good information. I'm not a fisherman, but I learned a lot today. Thank you for that. And,
well, good. I'm glad.
We did put your contact information in the chat, so thank you again.
Sure, and I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody wants to send my way, and I appreciate the opportunity to provide you with the update.